Hey there guys, I've been warning for this episode. I talk about a lot of serious things I was going through and emotions I was feeling, including having suicidal thoughts. And I don't want anybody to think that I was making light of having such thoughts, as there are a lot of people who struggle and go through much worse things than I ever went through it. As such, I'm putting down below me right here the number for the National Suicide Prevention Hotline for anybody to call and to get help from. Suicide is a very, very serious issue that affects millions of Americans, and we need to help people any way they can. So with that, please enjoy the episode.
I have proved to everybody in the world that I am the best on this microphone, in that ring, even at commentary. Nobody can touch me.
Hey there, wrestling fans. It is CM Jew, the most glorious Jew that ever lived, and you're a wrestling rabbi, so just sit back and bask in my tranquilo, bro. And I wish we would have a more fun topic to talk about today, but today we're going to talk about something that, quite frankly, has been a video a year in the making. A video I've wanted to do since 6, 7, possibly 8 months ago. This is a story about how I almost quit being a wrestling fan last year. It's been a very hard year for me. Obviously, I made that one video in October about Kofi Kingston, and I also did the video on Hell in a Cell. I've been wanting to do much more, but it's just, I've had this push and pull with myself. Like, I want to review stuff, but I feel like I need to do this video first before I can move forward and get just stuff off my chest. So I want to lay some groundwork for this video. One, this is not going to be a call-out video. I'm not calling anybody in particular out. No individuals. Rather, groups, though, will be called out, as you'll understand, hopefully. But this is not meant to be a call-out video into, this person wronged me and release the hounds upon him, or the internet hounds, or however they're gonna, I don't want anybody to be losing, not that I'm so popular that if I say this person offended me, that people are gonna really care, unfortunately, or be such en masse that they're gonna ruin a person's career. But I also don't want somebody to hear this who might agree with what happened to me and feel bad to then go attack those people. Because that does nothing. Because point 2 is I want this to be a teachable moment. I want to teach here. I want people to listen and hopefully maybe learn something. Because 3, in getting this off my chest, I hope to make this a better wrestling fandom. Because the reason I almost quit wrestling has to do with wrestling fandom. So, let me take you back a couple years. There was the Battleground pay-per-view that happened a couple years ago, in which it was main evented by Seth Rollins and Dolph Ziggler for the Intercontinental title in an Iron Man match. Now, I say this because this was really the first moment in which I started to recognize something, what I felt was wrong with the wrestling fandom. Now, what happened on this night was that Like I said, Dolph Ziggler and Seth Rollins main evented for the Intercontinental title. And the match was basically made fun of. Like, it got booed all throughout the match. I mean, the infamous, as the clock would go down to 0 for each minute, the fans would start counting down, going, like it was the Royal Rumble. And just an overall shit all over the match. And the reason this is relevant is that, this was the match that the fans were asking for to be the main event of the pay-per-view. They wanted this Iron Man match. They wanted to see these two wrestlers go. They were pleading for WWE to make this the main event. So why did they shit all over it? Well, you have to look back at what happened during that pay-per-view. And for the most part, it was a very decent and good pay-per-view. Except for the match that happened before. Now that match was Rusev versus AJ Styles for the WWE Championship. And while it was a good match, fans in general decided that they did not like the booking decision of not having Rusev win the title and instead start to go down what would be the program that would break up Rusev Day of Rusev and Adrian English, And fans just immediately rejected doing that storyline and immediately rejected the fact that Rusev didn't win the title because they wanted him to, regardless of whether it was a smart booking decision or not. And so they decided to shit all over the main event. Now, some people say this is in fans, right to do, and yeah, it is, but it also made the fans look like assholes. Because that's what they were, assholes. Because when you ask for something and are giving it and then shit all over it because of something that is out of that situation's control, because your own ego is involved, that makes you an asshole. And this was really the first instance I was starting to get in this modern era of just the hardcore wrestling fandom being just obsessively obnoxious and just a pain to go through. No longer was it fun to go online on Twitter or Facebook or to read wrestling reviews of Monday Night Raw because it was nothing but constant just negativity that wasn't criticism but rather emotional opinion. And let me explain the difference. Criticism is, I thought this match was bad because I thought the wrestlers didn't have the right chemistry. Or I thought the match they had didn't fit the story that they were trying to tell. That's criticism. Opinion, I think this match sucks because I don't think the right person won. Well, but it was a good match. Yeah, but the other person should have won. That type of emotional response that is not really based off any type of logic and really makes no sense in regards to why somebody likes something or not. Especially when, in fact, that may be the exact feeling that the WWE or any wrestling organization might be going for because, again, in particular when this is about heels winning, that makes you want to see that person ultimately get beat. It is the trick of the trade that promoters and bookers have been using since the dawn of wrestling. It just makes no logic sense to get so upset at anybody who is a booker or promoter in that type of context. Or at least for particular situations. But obviously, it's not just that particular situations. It's always past slights that the wrestling, or should I say the hardcore wrestling fandom has always felt has been against them. It just always felt like they took anything that they didn't like, as if Vince McMahon woke up that day and decided, this, pal, is how I'm going to screw the hardcore wrestling fan base. This is how I'm going to do it. The general idea was you had this hardcore wrestling fan base that was completely bought into the myth of Vince McMahon, which is what it was really about. Now, again, let me make this clear. Vince McMahon is no saint, but he is no devil either. You know, like, I can sit here and I can list plenty of reasons to why I think Vince McMahon probably should step down from being Booker. You know, he's had plenty of... He is a lot of times out of touch. A lot of his ideas do flop, but there are also a lot of ideas that work as well. And while, yes, he may be out of touch, he's also keen to the fact that sometimes he doesn't know what's going on and leaves it to people who do know what's going on. And thus you get stories like Kofi Mania, to which, going back to the Rusev not winning, if Rusev had won, we would have maybe never had Daniel Bryan winning the WWE title as he did from AJ, which led to his heel turn, which meant we would have never had Kofi Mania. Because if you can imagine Rusev being turned face going to that WrestleMania, that would have meant he would have had to face a heel to defend his title against. So we would have never had Kofi Mania had Rusev possibly won all the way back then. But, you know, again, I don't want to make it about that one pay-per-view because this was a constant build-up of the hardcore fan base, you know, again, like I said, buying into the myth of Vince McMahon being this horrible, evil person who can't book and that all his decisions sucked. And again, it made it to where, like I said, going on like after Monday Night Raw just to see what other people thought. Because, man, I thought this Raw was great, only to find out that everybody else hated it. And, you know, I'm not the type of person that sits there and thinks, oh, 1 million people hated this. I must be wrong. You know, this must have really, you know, or I should say, 1 million people watched this, and they're all wrong. I'm right. You know, I'm just like any other normal person. Oh, man, maybe it did suck. But then I would look through the episode logically and like, well, there was good stuff here and here and here, and really the good stuff outweighed the bad stuff, so why does everybody say this Raw sucked? Because more often than not, it usually had to do with one segment that they didn't like. And they let that one segment outweigh the bad. And so this is what I felt I was always dealing with in dealing with the hardcore wrestling fan base, in particular online. And as continued down and further, other situations would go on. A friend who, you know, he will be brought up later in this. Again, this is part of the particular reason I said this is not against anybody in particular, but interactions with him also sort of started to mirror what I was experiencing online. And I remember in particular, it was like when they announced that Bill Goldberg was going to face Undertaker at the next Saudi event. And he was like, why is this happening? And I put, as a joking glyph on Twitter as a response to him, what I think we all thought would be the most obvious answer to that: money. It wasn't praising it, it wasn't criticizing it, it was just explaining money. The most logical explanation why. To which he then proceeded to bite my head off as if I was defending Vince McMahon and the WWE in this decision. I wasn't. I was just explaining the most obvious answer to his question. But yet somehow that's defending WWE. And again, that's not to sit to say that that was the final straw. But again, experience with friends who were part of the hardcore wrestling fandom, or at least would consider themselves as part of it. The experiences online and other experiences. As such, last year I went to the G1 Climax Supercard with Ring of Honor and New Japan. And in general, I had a really fun time with the people in the general area of my seating. The guy next to me, the two older ladies behind me. We all enjoyed ourselves. Except that we were also miserable. And it wasn't because of the horrible Ring of Honor side of the card that include that god-awful Enzo Amore and Big Cass run-in after the Fatal 4-Way. No, it was rather because in our seating area was, in particular, right next to me, was this guy in a Hago shirt. And for those who don't know, Hago, the orgasm face, as it's called. This like Hawaiian shirt that was like nothing but those orgasm faces all over it. And all throughout the night, he was, oh, that's a sin, that's a sin, that's a sin. You know, because there's some wrestling review video that like counts the sins in every match or whatever. And just all night long, and saying at the top of his voice, just not shutting the hell up. And when he wasn't doing that, he was talking about, oh, how much I can't wait for AEW. And it's just, it really ruined the night in complete enjoyment for us. Like, we enjoyed the wrestling we saw, but he was so overbearing. And we kindly tried to tell him, just turn it down a couple notches. He turned it up. And that was just so annoying. And experiencing fans like that, which were rare, but they left such a bad taste in the mouth. But the final straw, for me, came about a year ago. It was right after Money in the Bank. Now, again, explanation into my life. A year ago, I was getting ready to graduate from college with a bachelor's degree, something that a lot of people didn't think I'd be able to do in my life because of my disability. As somebody with autism, not many people with autism graduate even with a special degree, let alone a normal one. And I was graduating with a normal 4-year bachelor's degree from college in communication, TV, and movies. And it should have been the happiest moment of my life, but it wasn't. And the reason it wasn't was a series of events that happened the week of my graduation. The week before, Ashley Milano, who was the Diva Search winner and former WWE Diva that of the late 2000s, I want to say 2008 or 9, had committed suicide, sadly. And so that was in the news. Then that Sunday was Money in the Bank. Now this is the Money in the Bank where they had that awesome Money in the Bank match last year where the competitors were just doing amazing stuff. Had one of Michael Cole's best calls he's ever done. And then Brock Lesnar came out in the end in a spot that we thought either Braun Strowman was going to come out on or Sami Zayn, who had been beaten up earlier in the night, was going to come out and steal the victory. Instead, it was Brock Lesnar. And this was just something universally condemned at the time. It's something now that I look back like that was a smart move considering how they used it and how they used it with Brock Lesnar winning and doing the rematch between him and Seth Rollins at SummerSlam. It ended up working. And I honestly look back at it like I'm now okay with this. But at the time, I didn't. And we were all universally angry at that. But then that Monday and going into Tuesday, there was a Twitter feed that came out. A couple of gentlemen were releasing a bunch of information upon a continuous Twitter chain about Ashley Milano had apparently filed in court a deposition that, she told Vince McMahon and several other high-ranking people in WWE that she had been raped by an army doctor while on a trip visiting the troops. And that they told her to just let it go and let them handle it or something along those lines. As it would turn out, this information was coming from Konstantin Kiros, who is this crooked ambulance chaser type of like injury lawyer who had tried for many years to sue WWE during this past decade on the thing of that they were responsible for concussions that wrestlers experience. A lawsuit that failed miserably and was thrown out, I think, with prejudice because it had no merit. And in particular, this deposition that Ashley did, because she had participated and had Constantine as her lawyer, this deposition was part of that lawsuit, was ultimately thrown out because it had really nothing to do with concussions. But it was a deposition that she gave. I don't want to get into the particulars because, again, it's a very deep subject. But for me, the point in particular is a bunch of people saw this as an opportunity to try to start a Me Too style movement campaign to get Vince out of WWE, or at the very least to drive him out of the booking position. And like that made my blood boil. Like that became the final straw. Like to me, especially when they've not even been buried in the ground, to try to use especially somebody who is a victim of suicide for your own personal goals. Like they claimed it was justice for Ashley, but it was very obvious that they only cared about the story in the regards of, hey, we can use this to get rid of Vince. And that's all they cared about. And to me, that's desecrating the name of the dead. And you don't do that. That is something serious. And that was like the final straw. And it was because of two things. First, yes, it was a small group of people who were doing this. Mind you, in containment to the larger hardcore wrestling fandom. Like maybe 10% of it was doing this. But it wasn't just that. It was the silence by the larger wrestling community to not immediately jump up and say, this is wrong, what you're doing is wrong, this is horrible, how you're trying to use her name for your own personal politics, this is wrong. And to immediately, like this is something that fandom is supposed to do, regardless of the fandom. But when horrible things like this are engaged in our fandom, we as a large group are supposed to stand up and say something about it. And yet nobody did. Very few people did. And then I didn't out of fear, even. And that's just, it's like, I looked at myself as like, is this what the wrestling fandom has made of me? That I'm too afraid to speak up when I see something wrong out of fear of what? Losing a couple friends? And being, at the same time, being disgusted at seeing a fandom that I considered my family do nothing about it. It was the final straw. That Tuesday night, I had talked to a friend I mentioned before who I was going to be on their podcast and said, I can't be on because I can't be fair and reasonable, which again is something I very much care about being, is trying to be as fair and reasonable as possible. And because I didn't feel like, like I said, I could be fair and reasonable. I was too emotionally angered by it. And as the week continued, it just continued to the point that I felt suicidal. Like, this is a family that I have been with all my life. I watched wrestling when I was younger, up to about 96, when, because of Hogan's heel turn, which I am, I shouldn't say proudly admit, but like, again, I was a hardcore Hulkamaniac. Him turning heel turned me away from wrestling for a couple of years, but then I came back in 99. And I have been watching it ever since, and the wrestling family has been there for me for all those years. And now for it to feel like turn it back on me, to feel like the wrestling family has decided that all those things that I felt were important were no longer important. You know, I no longer felt a part of the wrestling family. I felt disrespected and just left like by the roadside and abandoned by my wrestling family. And it's like, it made me have suicidal thoughts literally days before my graduation. Like, what's supposed to be the most happy and greatest time of my life, I couldn't even sit there and concentrate on it. Or at least it would have if, and by strange, horrible luck, I had a friend who was coming to the graduation who had seizures and was in the emergency room. He had to be taken from literally the parking lot during my graduation. And if it had not been for that, and me completely focused on worrying about his health and safety, which he turned out to be okay, thankfully, and made a full recovery. But if it had not been for that, I probably would have been sitting in my graduation just so depressed and feeling like I don't want to live on this earth anymore. Like, that's how it affected me. And at that point, you know, I made the decision that weekend after the graduation that, you know what, I'm going to quit being a wrestling fan. At the end of the month, I was going to cancel my subscriptions to New Japan and WWE, and that was it. And in that moment, I decided I'm quitting, and like a person who decides to quit or had been fired from his job at 18 years and decided, I don't got to worry about keeping up a farce anymore. I'm going to go out with a blazing glory. And that was my mindset. And I decided to, at least what I thought, was do one last tweet as I left being a wrestling fan, saying how I really felt. And in that tweet, I said, I wish for AEW to, excuse me, not that I wish, but I said, please God, let AEW fail. Not because they're not good people or that they don't deserve this organization, but because the fans are nothing but a bunch of bullies and bigots who don't deserve good wrestling. Now, again, I claim absolute anger in saying that tweet. And I'd like to right now apologize for sending that tweet. I shouldn't have sent that tweet. Like, as I'm saying, obviously I sent the tweet in anger, but even in anger, I still felt that AEW was good wrestling, and that the wrestlers deserved that company. It was more of the wrestling fandom, who I felt had been filled with nothing but bullies and bigots, and felt that the only thing that could possibly make them understand and possibly change their ways is if something that was precious to them was taken away. And so I sent that tweet out under that mindset of just absolute anger at the wrestling fandom. And, you know, I shouldn't have sent it. And I'm sorry about that. You know, I hurt friends' feelings. And I didn't mean to hurt friends' feelings. But it was sent and what I felt. And the hard part that has been over this past year is, while I'm sorry for saying that, I do feel that there has to be some type of punishment for those fans. You know, if Cody Rhodes and Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks and the Kenny Omega and them would come out, maybe not even berate the fans, but just tell the fans, you know what? You need to stop how you're treating WWE fans and how you're treating WWE. You know, there are good people over there working hard. You know, we can all succeed together. If they would get up and do that instead of seemingly trying to, you know, and I understand why they do it because it makes them money, but stem the seeds of the wrestling war, I would watch AEW. But as it is, I have yet to watch an episode of AEW Dynamite. I saw some of the pay-per-views, and actually that's what got me in trouble with my friend. I did watch through YouTube clips the first AEW pay-per-view, and I decided to take one last Barbie shot before I ultimately felt I was going to leave, and poked fun at what I felt was the propaganda about healthcare that AEW was talking about when they had this overly bloody match that didn't need to really be bloody. And, Kenny Omega injuring his arm and wrestling for a half hour with I can't remember, I think he pulled his arm out of his socket or something like that. I'm sure somebody will correct me below. To which that led to me and my friend having a fight and him saying, sadly, that he didn't want to be my friend anymore. Which, I'm sad. Unfortunately, that's his choice and I respect his choice. There's nothing I can do about it. But he was also right. Because he said in a final tweet that I don't like wrestling and I was never a wrestling fan and that I was no longer welcome around him. And you know what? He was right at that moment. As far as I'm concerned, I wasn't a wrestling fan. Because like I said, I had quit wrestling. And for 2 weeks, I wasn't a wrestling fan. Didn't watch Raw, didn't watch SmackDown. Missed the best of the Super Juniors. And just in general, didn't care anything about the wrestling world. It was very surreal to sit there on Monday nights and almost not know what to do with myself because I wasn't watching wrestling. There was like a 3-hour period where I didn't know what to do. Yeah, I played some video games, but it wasn't the same. But I would have continued on with my plan to quit wrestling and quit the W Network and everything if it hadn't been for a couple things happening. The first event that happened was the NXT Columbine, which by the way is on the network and I very much suggest you go check out. But I sat there because it was on YouTube and I'm like, I have nothing else to watch. There's no sports, there's nothing. The Lightning had been eliminated from the playoffs. And I was like, there's nothing to watch. I'll just leave this on as I'm doing stuff. But as I left it on and continued watching, and I saw all the NXT superstars and trainees and everything working so hard to push each other through that Columbine. In particular, that's what I remember, was Xia Li motivating Angel Garza through his rowing exercises and his rowing reps to get to a certain number, and pushing him and pushing him and pushing him. And I was like, my God, this is amazing. And just that feeling like this is why I cheer for these people. This connection that I have with these superstars and just wanting to see them succeed. This is what I watch wrestling for. And so that week I ended up watching Raw, to which they had, I can't remember which 24/7 segment it was, but I remember this very funny segment with the 24 Championship and R-Truth that I just like, oh God, that's great wrestling comedy. That was then followed by the third and final event, which is I convinced myself to watch NXT TakeOver 25. And it was a great pay-per-view. And by the end of it, I'm like, I can't leave this. This is a love of my life. I love professional wrestling. And I realized that my love of wrestling isn't in that instant gratification of the fans, but rather my cheering for wanting to see people succeed. And so I ended up, I don't want to say renewing my vows or rededication, but I ended up not quitting wrestling and went back to just watching Raw and SmackDown, and for a while I just didn't concentrate on Twitter. But ultimately, again, it's that addiction to that instant gratification of just wanting to see, man, I thought this episode was great. I want to see other people who like this episode. And again, like I said, it makes it hard because it's not there. You see very few people, especially among people that I know on Twitter, who will just openly say nice things about WWE. And look, again, the bad stuff being pointed out wouldn't be so bad if the good stuff that WWE do all the time would just be acknowledged. But just watching people just bash WWE for one segment they hated when there's like 10 other good ones that were on that episode of Raw, for example. It drove me nuts. And still drives me nuts. And it goes to why I have such a frustration with the fans. And I think John Cena said it perfectly on After the Bell with Corey Graves a couple weeks ago, when he talked about that there's this contingent of the fan base, I shouldn't even say fan base, but of the wrestling community, that, all they care about is what does the WWE corporate want us to do. And, they want us to cheer that guy, so we're going to boo that guy. They want us to boo that guy, we're going to cheer him. Or they want us to boo, we're not going to boo. We're going to sit on our hands, or we're going to counter cheer, or we're going to do anything but help WWE, what we see as helping WWE corporate. And all they're doing is making it difficult for Vince McMahon and the other bookers to be able to book Monday Night Raw. And you have to understand why this is happening. Because the hardcore fan base is obviously the loudest. But when they counter cheer and that stuff, they make it hard for the more casual fan base who are mostly bandwagon jumpers to know who they want to cheer for. Because in general, the more casual fans tend to follow the lead of the hardcore base. But even more difficult is the so-called silent majority, which I feel I'm part of, which is a combination of more hardcore casual fans to fans like myself, which are a lot more understanding, I would say, of how wrestling is booked. We're not as loud as the hardcore base, and so I really feel our voice and the stuff that we like really gets ignored. Except for the occasional time where we're able to make the view count go up high enough. And it is just frustrating to see the wrestling community, because of a dedication to a political bias against Vince McMahon, who, like I said, is no saint, but is no devil. There are plenty of reasons why he should step down, but there are plenty of reasons why he should continue until he wants to. And again, I can't make that decision for you. I mean, that's something for a whole different video. And this video has gone long enough. But that's the thing. You can't, right now the way fans act is equivalent to a fireman setting fire to a house, letting it burn down, and then blaming, well, if the government had better phone lines, maybe we would have, or if the government gave us better fire trucks, maybe we would have gotten here on time. It's like that level of narcissism of you can't sit there and say something sucked when you don't do anything to contribute to it being better. And the one thing that all fans can do is be honest with who we cheer for, be honest with what we like, understanding that sometimes when something sucks, it's not Vince's fault or anybody's backstage. Sometimes, in the case of Lana and Rusev, it's a case of somebody not being able to perform the role as well as they can. Like Lana being able to perform, her role, which she overacted and it became annoying to a lot of people. That's criticism. She overacted, not just, it sucks, so the whole role sucks. You know, that ridiculous type of ideology in which if one segment is bad, the whole episode is bad. You know, people like Ricochet and Cedric Alexander and Alberto Carrillo and all the young wrestlers who are trying to make their way, they need you to cheer for them. Instead, what happens? Uncle Dave Meltzer says, Vince has gotten tired of Cedric or Ricochet. And so the fans here are like, why do we need to cheer for Cedric or Ricochet? And they don't cheer for them. And then that push that they were seemingly getting goes because now they think, they're not over anymore. And thus it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. As fans, it's our job to be as honest as possible. So, in a very long-winded way, that's how I almost quit wrestling. This was something I needed to get off my chest. I once again want to apologize to anybody whose feelings I hurt a year ago with the tweets I sent, because it was never my intention to really hurt people. But, like I said, in self-defense, at that time, I was angry and just wanted to vent my pain. And there's no excuse for it. But I am also truthful. Like I said, something has to happen. Something has to change within our community. Because I don't want a wrestling war. I want a wrestling nirvana. I want where I can go and watch everything, including AEW Dynamite. As it stands, I can't. I can't watch AEW Dynamite. Like I said, I've not watched an episode. And a large part of the reason is, every time I turn it on, I see those fans, and my rage and anger grows. I can't even look at those fans because they've made me so angry and upset me so much. Even a year later. I just want to go back to that time. Like it was in the late 2000s, 2009, 10, where I had the availability of so much wrestling from Lucha Libre and all different types of things. And just getting to enjoy it all. We have an opportunity right now with that, with New Japan and Lucha Libre being on YouTube and AEW and NXT and Raw and SmackDown. But it can only happen if we appreciate what we have before us. If we can appreciate the effort that everybody is trying to do. Even in this time of great pandemic, they're still trying to entertain us. And that's something that is, I feel, is honestly what all wrestling organizations are trying to do. Whether you agree with them staying open or not. And again, I don't want to get into that because there's a lot of things, business side to that. That's a whole nother video I have to do. And like I said, I told myself this is only going to be a 15-minute video. I need to end this now. So, hopefully, you understand my explanation as to where I've been for the past year and how I almost quit wrestling. And now that I've gotten this off my chest, I feel I can move forward, and hopefully you'll join me in moving forward in getting back into reviewing professional wrestling and sports entertainment. So, thank you, wrestling fans. And please, stay home, stay healthy.